Hello, I am Nathaniel Yamaguchi. I am the Associate Product Manager of Games here at Cryptozoic Entertainment and the lead designer of the Arkham Asylum game.
Great. So could you tell us a bit more about your favorite card in the set?
So there are a lot of cards that I like in the set. My favorite one that stands out would be the Heads You Live card. So this is a 4-cost superpower. As you may be able to guess from the name, it's a Two-Face theme card. With a set that has Two-Face in it, there are definitely a couple of cards that involve coin flips, and so this is my favorite of them. So it's a 4-cost superpower that has a flip a coin as part of its text box. If you get the heads version on the coin, then you get to basically play a card from the lineup for free. If you get the tails version of the card, then you destroy a card in the lineup and get victory points equal to whatever its VP value is. And so it's a fun nod to Two-Face, whereas if he gets the head side, something good happens. If he gets the tails or scarred side of the coin, then something bad, usually destructive, is going to happen.
So what would you say is the most difficult card to design, or the card that's changed the most?
So the card that's gone through the most changes is going to be the Mr. Freeze character and his unique starter card. Early on in the design, I kind of decided that Arkham Asylum was going to be like a spiritual sequel to the Forever Evil game, and so we also wanted to bring back the frozen tokens and use those in a different way. Initially, some of the designs we tested were being able to put frozen tokens on other people's ongoing cards, and so basically freezing them so they couldn't use them for a turn. It ended up not being great because there's kind of a large decision space if there's like 5 ongoings in play and which one actually you should freeze, and oftentimes it didn't really matter because the person was going to use the ongoing card anyway, and so that really wasn't paying out very well. And so what we ended up switching to after a few different trials of how to put out the token, what they did was actually now slightly away from frozen tokens and introducing this freeze token instead, which freeze tokens allow you to freeze cards from your discard pile, and it basically keeps them out of your deck for a cycle. So it's a way to pseudo destroy cards, but because it's not a full destroy, you can have it happen a little easier, a little earlier, because it's not going to destroy cards continually over the course of the game.
So which of those supervillain cards do you think most closely matches its comic book counterpart?
So I am a big fan of Batman's Rogues Gallery, so I think a lot of them are definitely very thematic in what they do. My personal favorite one, and this is maybe a little biased because Riddler's my favorite of Batman's villains, is I really like how Riddler's design came out. And so Riddler actually gets his own set of tokens that other characters don't get to use, just for the Riddler. The way he works is anytime he gains a card from the lineup, he leaves behind a token in its space, and then that space will get refilled by a new card. Whenever another player interacts with that lineup slot, so buying the card or bribing the card, then the token that the Riddler left behind will activate, and it'll maybe do something bad for the player, maybe do something good for the Riddler. It kind of varies for what the tokens are, and so it's kind of a fun puzzle. Well, whenever the Riddler does something, he leaves behind a little puzzle for you to try to solve, and you have to decide, okay, is it worth buying that card to do whatever the token is? Maybe I should hold a defense back because some of those tokens are attacks. Maybe I should spend my VP because some of those tokens make me lose VP. And so there's different ways you can try to play around the tokens, or just take them head on. And it definitely helps with variability because we couldn't just have riddles which you know the answers to by the time you played the game once already. So this is a kind of an abstract way of doing it, but it definitely allows for variability.
Was there a particular reason why you wanted to bring back Surge for this expansion?
So Surge was a mechanic we introduced in the Justice League Dark Kickstarter, and it's one I liked a lot. I think it's probably going to be one of our evergreen keywords. In other words, it's something that we'll probably use in most sets. What's nice about this Surge is that it helps with locked lineups. So with a variable lineup, there are times where they're all going to cost 6 or 7, and then it's hard to buy stuff. So surging allows you to add more cards to lineup to hopefully get something that is affordable. It's also a way to help characters that maybe want specific card types or specific types of keywords on cards, and so being able to add more to the lineup gives them more options and hopefully allows them to get the cards they need to make their deck better.
So we did that skit about Bribe, and that was kind of like jokingly hinting towards your philosophy going into Bribe. But what was the actual design philosophy in wanting to create the Bribe mechanic?
So when I first sat down for Arkham Asylum, I know one way I wanted to separate it from Forever Evil, which is the other villain set, is that for Gotham City, it's definitely known as the most corrupt city out there. So lots of people, both on good and bad sides of the line, who maybe will look the other way if you give them enough money. So it definitely, like, before I even designed what the mechanic did, I knew I wanted bribe to be something you could do in the game. And so we tried a few different mechanics for what you could do to bribe. The one we ended up settling on, which was the most fun, and playtesters love this, was you can spend your VP tokens to bribe cards. And so some cards in the main deck will have a bribe cost on them that'll be 1 to 4 victory points. And so if you have VP tokens, you can spend those to play that card directly from the lineup. Once we switched over to VP tokens, the playtesters loved it. They said it was one of their favorite parts about the game. It was definitely on the right track. So one helpful thing about the bribe mechanic is that it does help speed up the game a little bit. So you do have these VP tokens sitting around that will be worth points at the end of the game, but if you can convert them into higher power cards of your deck, that'll help your deck get better faster, and then get through those Nemesis cards at a higher rate. And so one positive thing was that it did help keep the games within a time frame that's more similar to the first couple of DC games. One definite challenge with the bribe is trying to figure out what the correct number of VP tokens are for each of the cards. Roughly, it's about 1 VP per power that you get, although some of them have a little higher rate, some have a little bit lower rate. Some of that is thematically, like some cards are more expensive to bribe just because, hey, this is a hero, so you gotta pay a little bit more to get them to do something. Some are a little bit on the cheaper side because whatever their extra bonus effect is situational, so might be a little bit cheaper to bribe those, but definitely zoning in on where the correct amount of VP was so that you would want to play the card, but it isn't completely busted if you do it, was a challenge.
Was there any difficulty in seeding the rest of the main deck with cards that give you VP so that you could have, like, you know, not a critical mass of VP, so that people weren't just bribing stuff left and right? Was that an issue at all?
So getting the amount of VP generation to be a good amount was definitely a challenge at the beginning. All the characters have a special starter in their deck, and most of them are a way for them to generate VP. So pretty much every character has a way to generate VP. There definitely are cards in the main deck that also will give you VP based off of whatever conditions are on the card. Because we wanted to make sure that VP was something that all players had access to at a relatively consistent amount, we did have the unique starters, but then we also have the hostages. And so one of the things that changed in the development when we moved bribe to cost VP tokens was we also made it so that the hostages are also a way that you get VP. So prior to this, the hostages didn't give you victory point tokens, they were just worth a victory point if you had them in your deck. But then we changed that to where they're worth 0 victory points inherently, but whenever you play them, they give you a VP token. So taking hostages is another way that you're guaranteed of getting victory point tokens you can use for bribing later in the game.
Just continuing on the trend of bribe, is there like a threshold of how powerful an effect can be to be on a card that you can bribe?
So I think the most powerful bribe card in the deck is +4 power and maybe draw a card if you played a certain card type, which obviously could be 5 to 8 power depending on what that card is you end up drawing. So there's definitely upper end that we're pushing, but keep in mind those stronger effects are worth more VP. So for example, if you're paying 5 VP to play this card, you're probably buying a boss, but is that boss going to be now worth the 5 victory points that you just spent on doing that? Early enough in the game? Probably. Later in the game? Not so much.
So I also wanted to ask about the challenges and differences when you're designing Nemesis heroes versus Nemesis villains.
Sure. So for the most part, designing a Nemesis card, whether it's a hero or a villain, usually isn't that big of a difference. When we're designing a Nemesis, oftentimes if it's a character we've done before, we may have some tie-ins for what the Nemesis does that relate to characters previously, because we always want there to be synergy between the character you're playing and cards that might have your character as part on them. One actual difference that I did make about halfway through designing the game was there was a point where I was looking at the Nemesis effects. So like, what does Nightwing do when he shows up? What does Robin do when he shows up? What does Batgirl do when they show up? So one thing I decided to be more thematic is kind of limit what the first appearance attacks could do on the superhero Nemesis cards. One trope with the superheroes is like they don't kill, right? So oftentimes supervillain nemesis attacks will destroy cards from your hand or discard pile or wherever. And so I kind of made a design limit that most of the heroes would not destroy cards that you had, because that was an unheroic thing to do. So they would do other things other than destruction. Now there are of course a couple heroic characters that are maybe more anti-hero that do still destroy your cards, but for the most part, all the Bat Family characters are doing other things than destroying your cards.
Going into the last question, challenges in designing hostages as a new card type, as a new deck, also a new ongoing kind of card.
Sure. So Bribe was the first mechanic that I for sure knew I wanted to do in the Arkham Asylum set. The second mechanic was hostages. So another kind of difference between the Forever Evil bigger, more powerful supervillains and the Arkham Asylum, who are lower power level characters, oftentimes what they have to do is take a hostage. You know, you get the heroes to do what you want if you have a hostage to negotiate with. And so that was again the second thing I decided on was, okay, hostages would be a mechanic. Now, hostages went through a lot of iterations. They actually started out as cards in the main deck, was what they started out with. Pretty early on though, we realized that really wasn't working because it was kind of diluting the main deck to have the hostages in there. We kind of made the decision of, well, what if there is, next to the henchman stack, which is the kick replacement in this set, what if there's a stack of 2-cost cards? One common complaint players might have is when they have that 2-power turn, which you could possibly have in the first couple of turns, is, well, you might not have anything to buy because the lineup might not have a 2 in it. So one counter to that is having the hostage stack, so you pretty much will always have a card to purchase, assuming you have at least 2 power. Now, the next step then was, well, what do those hostages do? So I did want them to have ongoing effects, because the idea of having a hostage is something you have until you need to use them for something, whether it's blowing them up or giving them away to avoid an attack. And so it was definitely early on that I wanted them to be ongoings. And then we tried a bunch of different iterations of what those ongoings were. Originally they were all unique, but that was kind of a pain, and so we kind of settled on like 4 different versions of hostages. You'll see cards that destroy cards, cards that are defense cards, some cycle cards, and then a couple unique ones, which we'll see more on that during the campaign. And then, as I mentioned kind of earlier, another transition for the hostages was them being 1 VP 2-cost cards to 0 VP 2-cost cards, then giving you a VP token every time you played them.